everyone. My name is Freeman. I am a former UGST student, and I graduated in 2024 with a Master of Theological Studies. I am so honored that Dr. Reddy has given me the opportunity to contribute a little bit to this class. And today I'm going to be talking about having an attitude of humility when communicating and interacting cross-culturally. So I'm sure all of you know that humility is something that we are called to have. As a Christian, we're called to be humble. But I think humility takes on maybe a slightly deeper or unique form when it comes to interacting with others who do not share our same cultural background. We might have to think a little more critically about it. We have to check our attitudes and to, like I said, critically consider the words that we're using and to make sure that we are really coming across in the right way in all of our interactions and all of our relationships. So the first foundational key to having cultural humility is to have a firm understanding and focus on our mission. Now, I know this isn't a mission of the church class, so I won't really delve into that, but our mission at the base, at the core, is to share the gospel and to make disciples. I think too often we might desire to convert people to our culture, but that's not our mission. If our goal is to change everything about someone to make them like us, then we get really off base. We lose focus on the mission, and that's where some issues arise. I met an individual while I was traveling to Italy, and he commented that if it was up to him, everyone would be Sicilian. And I had a pastor when I was growing up that said something similar, that if it was up to him, everyone would live on a farm and drive a John Deere tractor. There's nothing wrong with enjoying your own cultural background, but it's not a part of our mission to convert someone to our culture. When our mission gets skewed and we begin thinking in that way, then we start trying to replicate ourselves, but our mission is to replicate Christ. A second key to having cultural humility is to have a proper view of ourselves, which kind of ties into our mission. When thinking about this topic, I'm reminded of Jesus' parable in Luke 14:8-11. It says, "When you are invited by anyone to a wedding feast, do not sit down at the best place, lest one more honorable than you be invited by him. And he who invited you and him come and say to you, 'Give place to this man.' And then you begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you're invited, go and sit down in the lowest place, so that when he who invited you comes, he may say to you, 'Friend, go up higher.' Then you will have glory in the presence of those who sit at the table with you. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." When we're interacting with others, and especially when someone welcomes us to be a guest into their culture, we should not assume that we are the most important person in the room. A lot of times we may have the tendency to privilege or to think higher of our own culture than we do of someone else's. So just a very practical example, I've heard people discuss driving down the road. And they'll say that people from the United States, they drive on the right side of the road, and people from somewhere else, let's say Thailand, they drive on the wrong side of the road. It's not the right side versus the left side, but it's the right side versus the wrong side. And I'm sure if you grew up in an area where you're used to driving on the left side of the road, you probably have the same opinion about people who drive on the right side of the road. But it would be arrogant on our part to assume that our culture is correct and someone else's culture is incorrect. When we are communicating interculturally, we don't need to try and take the highest seat at the table. David Livermore, in his book, Cultural Intelligence, he said, quote, "The challenge is to be true to who we are while altering our behavior in ways that will best communicate love and respect to the other," unquote. Now, this doesn't mean that we have to disparage our own culture, but we also have to resist this urge of assuming that our culture is in some way superior to someone else's. Philippians 2:3 says, "Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself." A third key to cultural humility is remembering that we are called to follow Jesus' example by serving others. Mark 10:45 says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." It's not hard to maintain an attitude of humility when we understand that servanthood is a fundamental part of being like Christ. Another verse on this topic is Ephesians 5, verse 21. It says, "Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ." We're called to serve others in submission, regardless of their social status, their wealth, where they came from, their background. Regardless of any of that, we are called to servanthood, to submission. When we become a part of God's kingdom, we have a new identity. We have a new mindset. Sherwood Lingenfelter states in his book, Leading Cross-Culturally, that this new identity, quote, "must be the conceptual framework through which we relate to all people," unquote. Many times we might fall into this trap of feeling entitled. I deserve this, I deserve that, I deserve to be treated a certain way. But our mindset, if we think like this, is really just focused on ourselves. And we fail to really connect with others because we're not really seeing where they are. We're not really seeing them for who they are because we are just putting the focus on ourselves. But we have to remember that our mission is to reach others with the good news, to serve as Christ did. When we shift our mindset, we will begin to be less worried about who offends us, or who does us wrong, or even who goes against our own cultural expectations. Because we're going to be more driven to meet people where they are with the good news. Galatians 5:13 says, "You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love." So understanding our mission, having a proper view of ourselves, and following Jesus' example of servanthood, all of these are fundamental elements, just as our lives as Christians. So how can we really directly apply those things when we are talking about communicating interculturally? So first of all, the tone and the words we use, they really matter. A lot of times the words that we use are an overflow from our mindset. So the things that we've just been talking about, obviously we have to make sure that we are having the right mindset. But then we also have to be very intentional about how we are communicating with others. Darrell Bach, in his book, Cultural Intelligence, he argues that for years, the church has been engaging in a culture war, where the very people that we are called to reach, that they've been seen as the enemy. So we have to ask ourselves, how are we referring to others? How are we talking about people? How are we talking to people? Are we treating them with respect? Or are we just kind of treating them like the next project that we have to work on? I like this quote from Lingenfelter. It says, quote, "A healing touch without good news, or the good news without a healing touch, are both incomplete expressions of the vision that Christ gave us in the Gospels," unquote. Obviously, it's our mission to share the gospel with others. That's what we're called to do. But if we're doing it in a way that's disrespecting or degrading someone else's culture, then they're probably not going to be in a place where they can actually receive the gospel. We can't approach others with this savior complex, that we're just here to fix them, that we're here to change the parts about their culture that we don't like. But we are called to be bold about the gospel while remaining humble as the messengers. A second way that we communicate humbly cross-culturally is by giving a backseat to our own cultural preferences. So, like I mentioned previously, that does not mean that we crumple up our culture and everything that makes us who we are and we just throw it in the trash. But it means that we prioritize our identity as citizens of God's kingdom. As Lingenfelter says, quote, "Our loyalty to clan, community, and nation, all of that, it must take second place to our identity with Christ and with the people of God," unquote. It's okay to love your country. It's okay to love where you're from. It's okay to love your culture. But is your patriotism, are they putting someone else down? In the end, we are citizens of heaven. So I served as an associate in missions for a 6-month term a few years ago, and while I was there, we celebrated Thanksgiving at our apartment. We had green bean casserole, we had sweet potatoes, we had the works, because we enjoyed celebrating a part of our culture that we had from being from America. But when it was Christmas time, when we're celebrating with the church there, we celebrate in a way that's appropriate to their culture. We sang Christmas songs in their language. We had their cultural food instead of prioritizing our own and say, no, we have to do this in the American way. We can't let our own culture or what's normal to us be demeaning to someone else, but sometimes we have to put aside what's normal to really reach out and build community with someone else. So a third way we practice cultural humility is by getting rid of our presuppositions about someone else. We can't just assume that we know why others act the way that they do. We have to show humility by really asking questions, rather than just jumping to conclusions. Lingenfelter says, quote, "We must develop loving communication with one another. Communication begins with the ask, seeking to understand the thoughts and motives of a sister or a brother in Christ," unquote. When we truly seek to understand someone else's culture, we're able to better understand them and to build deeper relationships with them. I'm sure you know, no one likes to know it all. No one likes to be treated less than someone else. No one likes to be degraded or disrespected. And that's especially true when it comes to intercultural relationships. When we are connecting with someone who is from a different cultural background than our own, we must do so with humility. We have to seek to understand without valuing our own culture above someone else's. Bach explains, quote, "Whatever we may think about culture, engaging requires working to build bridges," unquote. We build these bridges by the tone and the attitudes we have, by the words we say, by giving a backseat to our own cultural preferences, and by simply asking questions. Our foundation when seeking cultural humility is to think missionally, having a proper view of our own identity and others' identity, and not thinking that ourselves or our culture is greater than someone else's, and by following Jesus' example by having an attitude of servanthood. Thank you so much for your time today, and thank you, Dr. Reddy, for this opportunity. I hope that you enjoy the rest of this class and that you continue to grow in your studies.